9. Alignment and commitment. Our intense and continuing argument about the relations of writers to society often takes the form of an argument about what is variously called alignment or commitment. But it is soon apparent in this argument that several different questions are being discussed, and that some confusion is caused by radical variations in what alignment and commitment are taken to be. It is a central proposition of Marxism, whether expressed in the formula of base and superstructure, or in the alternative idea of a socially constituted consciousness, that writing, like other practices, is, in an important sense, always aligned. That is to say, that it variously expresses, explicitly or implicitly, specifically selected experience from a specific point of view. There is, of course, room for argument about the precise nature of such a point of view. It does not, for example, have to be detachable from a work, as in the older notion of a message. It does not have to be specifically political, or even social, in the narrowest sense. It does not, finally, have to be seen as, in principle, separable from any specific composition. Yet these qualifications are not meant to weaken the original claim, but simply to clarify it. Alignment in this sense is no more than a recognition of specific men in specific, and in Marxist terms, class relations, to specific situations and experiences. Of course, such a recognition is crucial against the claims to objectivity, neutrality, simple fidelity to the truth, which we must recognize as the ratifying formulas of those who offer their own senses and procedures as universal. But if all writing is in this sense aligned, what is the point at any time of a demand for commitment? Is not this always a demand to write from one point of view rather than from others, and in this sense a demand for affiliation, conversion, or even obedience? Protests against this demand have been often enough made by the enemies of Marxism, who suppose falsely that only Marxism and its associated movements ever make it. Let another protest be entered from a Marxist, Brecht, against Lukács and his Moscow colleagues in the 1930s. They are, to put it bluntly, enemies of production. Production makes them uncomfortable. You never know where you are with production. Production is unforeseeable. You never know what's going to come out, and they themselves don't want to produce. They want to play the apparatchik and exercise control over other people. Every one of their criticisms contains a threat. Quoted in Walter Benjamin, talking to Brecht, New Left Review. This is a real protest, in a real situation, in which, in the name of socialism, many writers were cajoled, repressed, and even destroyed. Yet it is also simply one example of the innumerable protests of many writers in many periods against the actual or would-be controllers of production, in church, state, or market. But has this practical or theoretical pressure on writers anything to do necessarily with commitment? Commitment, if it means anything, is surely conscious, active, and open, a choice of position. Any idea can be abused by a self-referring and controlling authority. Freedom to publish, for example, can be practically redefined as freedom to publish at a profit. The key question, in the matter of alignment and commitment, is the nature of the transition from historical analysis, where every kind of alignment and every kind of commitment can be seen in actual writing, to contemporary practice, where all the alignments and commitments are in active question. The latter evidently is disturbing. Many positions can be tolerated when they are dead. A safe Marxism sticks to historical analysis, and in its adaptation in academic studies shows every sign of doing so. But the central thrust of Marxism is the connection of theory and practice. How does this actually work through, in the case not only of commitment, but of the apparently less controversial alignment? Marx and Engels said several hard things against tendency literature. It became more and more the habit, particularly of the inferior sorts of literati, to make up for the want of cleverness in their productions by political allusions which were sure to attract attention. Poetry, novels, reviews, the drama, every literary production teemed with what was called tendency. Engels, October 1851. a worthless fellow who, due to lack of talent, has gone to extremes with tendentious junk to show his convictions, but it is really in order to gain an audience. Engels, August 1881. But these comments, leaving aside their characteristic aggressiveness, relate to what might be called applied tendency, the mere addition of political opinions and phrases, or unrelated moral comments, of the kind Marx found in Eugène Sue among the most wretched offal of socialist literature, The Holy Family, 1845. The case is different with the profound social and historical critique and analysis which they praised in other writers, whether it was implicit, as in Balzac, or explicit, as in what Marx called the present splendid brotherhood of fiction writers in England. He instanced Dickens and Thackeray, Miss Brontë and Mrs. Gaskell, whose graphic and eloquent pages have issued to the world more political and social truths than have been uttered by all the professional politicians, publicists, and moralists put together, the English middle class. Marx and Engels' discussions of Lassalle's play, Franz von Sickingen, stressed the need for a profound understanding of social and historical crisis, as against reduced or simplifying treatment. But that such an understanding is aesthetically necessary, and that it is radically connected with social and historical, including political understanding, is never doubted for a moment. Indeed, the critique of tendency literature is not a case against commitment, but a case for serious commitment, the commitment to social reality. The controversy about commitment could not, of course, remain at this general level. It became active in several different social and historical situations, when commitment became practical and even programmatic. Thus, Sartre's arguments for commitment in the specific conditions of post-war Europe rested on a belief in its inevitability. If literature is not everything, it is worth nothing. This is what I mean by commitment. It wilts if it is reduced to innocent sort of songs. If a written sentence does not reverberate at every level of man and society, then it makes no sense. What is the literature of an epoch, but the epoch appropriated by its literature? The Purposes of Writing, 1960. Writers, necessarily involved with meanings, reveal, demonstrate, represent. After that, people can look at each other face to face and act as they want. Sartre was arguing against notions of pure art, which, when they are serious, are always forms, however concealed, of social commitment, and which, when they are trivial, are simple evasions. At the same time, he complicated this position by an artificial distinction between poetry and prose, reserving the inevitability of commitment to the meanings of the prose writer, and seeing meaning and emotion in the poem as transformed into things beyond this dimension. Adorno's critique of this position is convincing. The artificial separation of prose reduces writing beyond the reserved area of poetry to a conceptual status, and leaves all questions of commitment in writing unanswered. It is, of course, an aspect of Sartre's commitment to freedom that they are left unanswered. Moreover, within this general definition, as Adorno further argued, commitment remains politically polyvalent so long as it is not reduced to propaganda. Commitment, New Left Review, 1974. These are the flexible formulations and qualifications of one style of Marxist thought, relatively close in spirit to what Marx and Engels incidentally indicated. The harder questions, and with them the harder formulations, arose in direct relation to open revolutionary practice, in the Russian Revolution and again in the Chinese Revolution. Both Lenin and Trotsky saw writers, with other artists, as necessarily free to work in their own ways, to create freely according to his ideals, independent of anything. Lenin, collected works. To allow complete freedom of self-determination in the field of art. Trotsky, literature and revolution. But each made reservations. Lenin on the cultural policy of the revolution, which could not let chaos develop in any direction it may. Trotsky making self-determination subject to the categorical standard of being for or against the revolution. It was from the reservations, and not from the assertions, that one version of commitment became practical and powerful, extending from the level of general cultural policy to specification of the form and content of committed or socialist, the terms now in practice interchangeable, writing. What was then written was not all, or not merely, tendency literature, but the most public form of the argument was of that kind. Commitment as political affiliation, in a narrowing series of definitions, often polemically and administratively fused, from the cause of humanity to the cause of the people, to the revolution, to the party, to the shifting party line. The crisis thus provoked in Marx's thought is still evidently unresolved. It was useful, after such an experience, to find Mao Zedong saying, "It is harmful to the growth of art and science if administrative measures are used to impose one particular style of art and school of thought and to ban another." Mao, 1960. But this was not a return to liberalism. It was an insistence on the reality of open struggle between new and old forms of consciousness and new and old kinds of work. It was again subject to a reservation. As far as unmistakable counter-revolutionaries and wreckers of the socialist cause are concerned, the matter is easy. We simply deprive them of their freedom of speech. But this, at least at first, did not imply any doctrinaire equivalence between writing in a revolutionary society and any specific style. Marxism includes realism in artistic and literary creation, but cannot replace it. Mao. Instead, there is an emphasis on creative impulses rooted in the people and the proletariat, and a corresponding opposition to creative impulses arising from other classes and ideologies. This, it must be remembered, is a definition of the work of socialist writers. In the complexities of practice, formulations of this kind can be developed in very different directions. But what is theoretically most interesting in Mao's argument, alongside previously familiar positions, is an emphasis on the transformation of social relations between writers and the people. This can be reduced to the familiar emphasis on certain kinds of content and style, but it has also been developed in ways that change the whole problem. Commitment is a move by hitherto separated, socially and politically distanced or alienated writing. Mao's alternative theoretical and practical emphasis is on integration, not only the integration of writers into popular life, but a move beyond the idea of the specialist writer to new kinds of popular, including collaborative writing. The complexities of practice are again severe, but at least theoretically, this is the germ of a radical restatement. Most earlier discussions of commitment are either, in effect, a variant of formalism, an abstract definition or imposition of a socialist style, or a late version of romanticism, in which a writer commits himself, as man and writer, or with nuances between these, to a cause. The more significant Marxist position is a recognition of the radical and inevitable connection between a writer's real social relations, considered not only individually, but in terms of the general social relations of writing in a specific society and period, and within these the social relations embodied in particular kinds of writing, and the style or forms or content of his work, now considered not abstractly, but as expressions of these relations. This recognition is powerless if it is in itself abstract and static. Social relations are not only received, they are also made and can be transformed. But to the decisive extent that they are social relations, there are certain real pressures and limits, genuine determinations, within which the scope of commitment as individual action and gesture must be defined. Commitment, strictly, is conscious alignment or conscious change of alignment. Yet in the material social practice of writing, as in any other practice, what can be done and attempted is necessarily subject to existing or discoverable real relations. Social reality can amend, displace, or deform any merely intended practice, and within this, at times tragically, at times in ways which lead to cynicism or active disgust, Commitment can function as little more than an ideology. Conscious ideology and tendency, supporting each other, must then often be seen as symptoms of specific social relationships and failures of relationship. Thus, the most interesting Marxist position, because of its emphasis on practice, is that which defines the pressing and limiting conditions within which, at any time, specific kinds of writing can be done, and which correspondingly emphasizes the necessary relations involved in writing of other kinds. The Chinese ideas of integration with the people, or of moving beyond the exclusiveness of the specialist writer, are mere slogans unless the transformed social practice on which such ideas must depend is genuinely active. They are not, that is to say, in their most serious forms, simple and abstract ideological positions. In any specific society, in a specific phase, writers can discover in their writing the realities of their social relations, and in this sense their alignment. If they determine to change these, the reality of the whole social process is at once in question, and the writer within a revolution is necessarily in a different position from the writer under fascism, or inside capitalism, or in exile. This does not, or need not mean, that a writer postpones or abandons his writing until some desired change has happened, nor should it mean that he becomes resigned to the situation as he finds it. Yet all practice is still specific, and in the most serious and genuinely committed writing, in which the writer's whole being, and thus necessarily his real social existence, is inevitably being drawn upon, at every level from the most manifest to the most intangible, it is literally inconceivable that practice can be separated from situation. Since all situations are dynamic, such practice is always active and is capable of radical development. Yet, as we have seen, real social relations are deeply embedded within the practice of writing itself, as well as in the relations within which writing is read. To write in different ways is to live in different ways. It is also to be read in different ways, in different relations, and often by different people. This area of possibility, and thence of choice, is specific, not abstract, and commitment, in its only important sense, is specific in just these terms. It is specific within a writer's actual and possible social relations as one kind of producer. It is specific also in the most concrete forms of these same actual and possible relations, in actual and possible notations, conventions, forms, and language. Thus, to recognize alignment is to learn, if we choose, the hard and total specificities of commitment.